Hi folks, in this video I'm going to demonstrate building roof panel A for a model 120 Bugout Bungalow. First I want to talk about tools. So you don't need a lot of tools to build a Bugout Bungalow. Primary tools are a cordless driver for screws, a small saw, or any saw actually that you feel capable of handling. What I don't recommend is getting too big a saw. So a saw like this, which is pretty standard for commercial and residential housing construction, is heavy and somewhat dangerous. If you're not used to using them, I wouldn't recommend even trying something like that. So one of the saws I recently came across is from Harbor Freight. It's a 6.5 inch. It's a lithium battery in it, and we're going to test it out. I've been using it. I'm real happy with it. It costs about 50 bucks, but then you got to buy a battery and a charger. You're better off buying the whole kit. And so this is a cordless driver. The Bauer brand, they seem to be pretty good for the price point. So those are the two primary tools you're going to need. We got a charger, got batteries, you're going to need a pencil, construction pencil, a tape measure, hammer's handy, you're going to need a chalk line, at some point you're going to need a level, utility knife's good, a square. I think that's primary tools you're going to need. Again, the primary thing is you're going to need a driver, a saw. Don't get too big of a saw. I would say those are the primary things as far as tools go. That's about it. So we're going to go on to building us a panel. So I want to talk about plywood. The plans show 1/2 inch CDX, is which I recommend. You can use 3/8, a little lighter weight. Almost anything flat, you can use metal or tin, but for the sake of standardization, I'm using 1/2 inch CDX plywood. You could also use, well, ACX would be overkill. Now the thing about the CDX, it has, well, it doesn't matter which side is up or down, except there's a slight variation. Look, you can see there's almost no knot holes. There's knots on this side. But on the other side where it's stamped, it's rougher and there's actual knot holes missing. So if you're going to leave this exposed, like on the inside or on the outside on the wall panels, you want to use a nicer side. And it's all going to get buried under insulation and roofing and whatnot. It doesn't matter which side is up or down. So don't overthink that and let it confuse you. So the next thing is need some pages of the plans. So we need pages. See, we got page 7, roof panel A framing. Page 8, roof panel plywood. We got page 11, which is going to show how to cut this plywood for the roof panels. It's the same for both sides, even though they're left and right hand panel. The plywood, this dimension, if it's going either direction, doesn't matter. This is standardized. And here's a pattern. This is important. This is page 15. This gives you the angles. Now, quite a bit of it is constructed with 45-degree angles, which you have on your square. But the square doesn't go beyond 45 degrees. So on one side we have a 55-degree angle. And this is your pattern that if you have a protractor or whatever, you might need to lay it out. But this is so you don't have to figure it all out. This already gives you the pattern. So what you can do is cut these lines out, make a cardboard template, plywood, or just leave it the way it is. You're probably only going to use it one time. Cut that out and use this for your pattern. But actually we don't need this one right now. That's when we start doing our struts. I don't call these framing members rafters, I refer to them as struts. So anyway, let's lay out one of these panels. Actually, so you kind of demonstrate what we're doing here. We're in no hurry, right? we're going to lay out the panel and show you what we're doing here. So I'm building this on the floor, not because I don't have sawhorses, but you may not have sawhorses. So this building is designed to use a minimum amount of resources, and actually labor or whatever else. So I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. Let's keep everyone on the same page. We have a tape measure, and we've already lost the pages we want. So our first panel, our dimension, this is on sheet 11, roof panel, so it's 64 plus inches. I'm going to use round numbers because the exact numbers are on the plans. You got to buy a set of plans with the exact number. If you're smart, you can back engineer it if you don't want to buy plans. Now we're coming down. Our entire length is 91 plus. Again, I'm just laying out, this is an entire roof panel. And this is consistent for all 8 of the roof panels. Now we're going to snap a line. Since we're at an odd angle, we got to set a nail or a screw. Absolutely no chalk on that line. Excuse me while I go get chalk. So we have our line snapped along here. So this triangle represents one of the panels. If you'll notice where this line cuts through where the plywood hits, the 2 pieces hit, if you measure it, it's 30 plus inches. So if I can transfer that, this mark to 30 and a half. I measure down. That measures 43 something. Set a nail, snap a line. So you see what I've done is those measurements got transferred over to here. So you build the whole panel, a single roof panel out of one piece of plywood. And that's kind of overkill demonstrating how and why I do that. But that's why I make this layout like this. Again, it doesn't matter up or down unless it's for aesthetics. So this piece of plywood, get out of our way for now. Again, the nice thing about building them on the ground, you don't have to deadlift the panels. You can walk them around or drag them as needed. And if you're working alone or you're not, real strong, then that's what you're going to have to do. So now we're basically ready to cut our panels. I need to put some spacers under it. Now, as far as snapping lines and these marks go, you can also use a straight edge of one of your 2x4 pieces of 2x4 by 8 foot dimensional lumber as a straight edge. Now, an alternative way to lay out for this, cutting this panel, is this triangle piece here. Actually, we can slide it over. So if we take this dimension, our 30 something, coming off the bottom of that panel, marker 30 something. Measure back from this edge, and that's going to be 34 or something. Going to transfer it down here. Now we can snap a line straight or line square to the plywood. Or if you have a big square, you can use that. Now our drop, so here's our waist piece with the one layout, but if we slide everything over, then we have a piece of plywood that's over 34 inches wide, except for we lose a little corner right there. So what I'm going to do, cut here, then cut here. We'll use these, and these will be put off to the side to be used for something else. So let's test out this saw. So real quick, on this particular saw, if you do get one, this allows the table to go up and down, and that locks it in. You have to press these side buttons in as a safety type of deal. And then you have angle cuts, which you won't be using for the most part, right there. So what you want to do is set this depth so just barely cutting through the plywood. And I'm going to round up some eye protection, and you should too before you cut. That was a long cut for a battery operated saw like that. There you go. That's the sheeting for the roof. Got to do that 8 times. You'll have all the sheeting cut for the roof. So now it's time to cut some struts. You'll need page 15, which is the pattern we had earlier, and then page 7, which shows panel A framing or struts. So let's start with the longest one. This building is pretty forgiving on lumber as far as straight. You want it reasonably straight, but if it has a bow or a crown, normally I'd put that to the what I call the inside of the panel. So all this lumber is pretty straight. Even whichever way it bows, it's not going to affect it too much. What it'll affect is where the valley kind of comes together, which is pretty forgiving. Same with a lot of these measurements. This is rough framing. It's framing, it's not a cabinet. So if you're off a little bit on some of these measurements and stuff, it really isn't that big a deal. And if you have to trim something once you get in place or whatever, that shouldn't be that big a deal either. And worst case scenario, I suggest you put this together with screws. I like the decking screws. And you can take it apart and fix whatever may have gone wrong. Basically, nothing should go wrong, or very little. So anyway, this first strut, I have a cut list here. So it's for the entire roof, so there's 4 of each of these. But we're only doing 1 right now. So I've labeled this. This is the valley, the longest one. And it's 105 plus inches. You'll have a 55 degree on one end and a 35 degree on the other end. Now your square doesn't have 55 degrees on it. It has a 35. And so what I've done is just made a pattern because it's simpler, because you're going to be doing a minimum of 8 of these. So go ahead and, what I can, on this one, I can just fold it over. You can glue this on some cardboard or plywood or just transfer it. Basically it's a 35 degree and 55 degree. So let's mark it. This is right here. So in this, let's make sure we don't get anything too mixed up. So the dimensions I've given are all long point, which is self-explanatory, or from the square, depending if it has an angle on the end or not. So we're facing this way. Put the 55 degree angle. I don't know if you can see all that. So look at the drawing on page 7. It's on this first one. Take your pattern. You'll see it drops down like that to the right corner of the board. Mark it. And you flip, so that if this was facing up, You're going to flip it over to get this reverse angle. And our measurement is 105 something. So here's our other angle. I flipped the pattern over. Now it'd probably be worthwhile to make a more substantial pattern. So that's the first one. Let's cut that. We're going to reset the depth of the saw. Just so the blade just coming out the bottom of the board. Eye protection. I'm real stickler about that. So our boards, it's funny, it's because of the grain or whatever, it's binding up on the blade. Little saw doesn't have a lot of torque, that's enough though. This is a carbide blade, it's nice and sharp, 6.5 inch on this. Half-inch blade, carbide blade. Two more to go. Those, I believe, come out of 8-footers. Let's get a nice straight one. No bow, doesn't matter. And you're going to have bows. You go nuts trying to... This has a bow in it right now, but the way this design works, because it's plywood and you can pull the bows out pretty much. So pretty forgiving actually. So which one are we going to do? Let's do the ridge. And it's the, we're going to use our pattern again. So it's going from square to long point into 35. And 63 something inches. Let's see, we don't want to. There we go. It's upside down again. Nice. Yeah, make your pattern out of cardboard or a piece of plywood. Less confusing. Oops. Having these tabs don't really help, so let's cut that. A little saw might be giving up the ghost. If we can get us through one panel, we'll call it a victory. Like I said, you need a spare battery. This is the bigger battery. It's the 5 amp or something like that. So I do have a smaller spare battery. If you're going to go this small or a non-plug-in or whatever, I have some spare batteries. But once we shift to the driver, it won't use as much juice. And even if this battery's getting low, it'll probably drive enough screws to assemble this thing. So in the meantime, you can stop doing one thing. Let's say cut a bunch of pieces. Torque the battery where the rips on the plywood. Otherwise, it'll cut a lot of these cross cuts like this. But anyway, I think saw's doing all right. Next piece, calling that the wall strut. So it's another squared at an angle. An 8-foot piece of wood. So any of your boards that have bows in them, or particularly bowed or something, and used for your shorter pieces. So when you do the walls, you can have 4-foot pieces and such. So more twisted up and bent ones used for the shorter pieces. So here we're going 79 and something to the long point of 55 degrees. There's the wall. So I'm putting the pattern face up to get that angle. Actually, that's right. Well, it looks like the little saw got us able to cut panels worth of wood. Let's assemble this. These are diagrams. So is that making sense? So now I'm going to screw the corners together, at least for a temporary hold. So we got our cordless. Now I have some 3/4 inch screws. I'm basically using them just to tack this thing together. The main strength is going to come from the plywood when it assembles. Think of it as an exoskeleton. We're not relying on this framing all that much as we are relying on the plywood for strength. Sort of like a dome. We're building this basically a series of triangles, and they're very strong. Well, that's not worth the effort. I'm going to use a shorter screw. I don't feel like fighting these. So better than this cordless drill, basically a driver would be superior. It's very similar, but it has an impact to it. It makes things going easier in this kind of doing this kind of work. So I'm just taking these screws and putting them in at an angle to temporarily hold this. Then I'm going to put the plywood skin on it, and that's what's going to make the thing strong. So these screws I'm using now are 1 5/8 inch coated deck screws. I use them all the time. I don't know why I like them. They're resistant. They seem pretty strong. So my angles came out pretty nice. They don't always, so hopefully you can see this. Nice and square. See my angles? The important thing is, let's say if your cut's off, you want to be too loose. You want the heel, this back part here. If that's loose, that's all right, as long as your dimensions are right at the tip. And just run a screw in here to toenail it. If it hits on the heel, it'll spread it and change the whole shape of the panel slightly. I mean, you can make it work, but all things being equal, if your cut's off and it's loose, you're all right. But if it's too tight, it'll make the panel bigger. When you go to assemble it, it can be a problem. So I just ran a screw in, just a 1 5/8 inch screw in through here, and you see my cut's nice and tight. It isn't always, especially if I'm in a hurry. Anyway, that's basically it. That's how you put together the panel A on a model 120 Bugout Bungalow. And now we're going to put the sheeting on it. Now, I'll just point out the way I cut the plywood, the nicer side will be facing down in case all I ever do is just paint under there, and that'll be the exposed ceiling. If I wanted to, I could put rigid foam on top of that plywood, but I also put it in between the struts and then put paneling or drywall or whatever over it. So is this thing making sense yet? It's pretty simple actually. So there's a left and a right hand panel at A and B, and dimensionally they're somewhat different. Not the plywood, but the actual framing. So now for reference, get page 8. This will tell us how this plywood goes on. I'll tell you right now, one of the important things is, this is very important. This edge in the valley needs to be held back, you know, a quarter or a half inch, something like that. The reason being, when these panels come together, the dimensions are laid out for the framing to hit. If this is right where on the edge, then the plywood hits first. If that happens, it's not really a big deal. You're going to have a little bit more of a gap in the bottom. Basically, you're holding the whole thing together with metal straps of one type or another. Same if there's a bow in something. You can take some screws, you can pull stuff together, and once you strap it, even if it's got a little daylight or something, it's still going to be strong. If you're concerned, just put more straps on it. But So all things being equal, you want these to be a little undersized as opposed to oversized. Because on, depending if it's a left or right hand panel, depends on how the plywood hangs over. So on panel A, the plywood is flush on the top. That's very important. So we got the plywood flush on the top. So we're supposed to be 1.5 inches past for the wall. So I'm setting this at 1.5 inches. Off 1/8 or 1/4 here and there. Ultimately, it's not going to make that big a difference. You can probably trim stuff if you have to in right where it's at. So I'm back pretty good here. I'm not so sure on down further. I have a gap. There could be a bug in this board also. Anyway. So right now I'd be running a little bit tight. So I'm going to cheat this 1.5 inches. I'm going to cheat it out some. And if you don't cheat it out, it'll be fine. Said it might hit a little soon up on the plywood. So going beyond 1.5 inches here doesn't matter because it's sitting on the wall framing, and then there's a 1/2 inch of plywood. You could have this 2 inches wide. That's why I'm saying that this is more critical when you go to assembly. I'm going to cheat this other panel back a hair also. And if you don't do any of this, cheating it one way or another, be fine. I'm going to go ahead and build a cabin out of this, and I might just sell it. Because I don't need another cabin right now. I'm just making this video to go along with the plans. There you go. That's panel A. Now it still needs to be screwed off. So there's only 3 or 4 panels. I can throw one in the corner down there. Because I'm just going to set this off to the side right now. And then we're going to move on to panel B. Now we'll discuss screwing this off here. Let me get this in. So, depending on how you're using this structure, I would recommend going 6 to 12 inches on these struts. Maybe a compromise would be about every 8 inches. But initially you could put the whole building together, just throw a few screws in it, make sure everything fits, you like what everything is together, come back and screw the whole thing off all at once. Except you could put, put a few in it, and that way if you have to adjust something, I think that's about it. So that's basically panel A. I know you can build it. If you can build this, there's only 3 framing members in